The air was sharp that night, the kind of cold that clings to your skin and sinks into your bones. It had been a while since Sebastian and I had done something spontaneous, so when he suggested we hike up to the overlook, I didn't hesitate. That spot had always been our refuge, a quiet place above the chaos of the city, where we could just sit, talk, and breathe. The trail was just as I remembered, dark and winding, the faint glow of the city below casting long shadows through the trees. Our flashlights cut thin beams of light ahead of us, and the gravel crunched underfoot with every step. We were halfway up when I glanced down at the McDonald's parking lot at the base of the hill. That's when I saw them, a group of 4 guys standing by a beat-up car. The parking lot was dimly lit, but I could make out their shapes, their movements. Something about the way they stood, their heads turning slightly toward us as if they were watching, sent a ripple of unease down my spine. "Sebastian," I said, my voice low, "do you see them?" He followed my gaze and shrugged. "Probably just hanging out, smoking or something." I wanted to believe him, but my gut told me otherwise. There was something off about their presence, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Still, I didn't press it. By the time we reached the overlook, the city view stretched out before us like a sea of stars. It was breathtaking, as always. We settled onto the rock wall that edged the cliff, the chill of the stone seeping through our jackets. Sebastian pulled out a bag of chips and we started talking about school, work, life. For a moment, the unease I'd felt earlier faded away. But then, faintly at first, I heard it, the sound of laughter and voices, carried up the trail by the wind. My heart sank. "Do you hear that?" I asked, turning to Sebastian. He nodded, his expression tightening. "Yeah." The voices grew louder, closer. I turned to see 3 figures emerging from the shadows, their movements casual, almost lazy. One of them, a tall guy with tattoos that crawled up his neck and a silver nose ring, was holding a blunt, the faint glow of the ember lighting his face. He wore a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Y'all want to hit this?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp, like a blade hidden beneath silk. Sebastian and I shook our heads. "No, we're good," I said, trying to sound calm. One of his friends chuckled, a short, cruel sound. "What are you, scared?" Sebastian scoffed, but I could see the tension in his jaw. I felt it too, a coiled spring in my chest, ready to snap. And then, before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "What were you guys doing back at the McDonald's?" The question landed like a bomb. The guy with the blunt froze, his grin evaporating. His friends exchanged glances, their expressions hardening into something cold and dangerous. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. And then it hit me. There were 4 guys by that car earlier, not 3. My stomach dropped. Sebastian nudged me, his voice barely a whisper. "We should go." I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. We stood moving slowly, trying not to provoke them. As we turned toward the trail, Sebastian's gaze flicked past the group, his face going pale. "Don't look now," he murmured, "but there's someone in the trees." Against my better judgment, I glanced. Half hidden in the shadows stood a 4th figure. He was tall, broader than the others, and holding something long and metallic that caught the faint moonlight. A crowbar, a bat. I couldn't tell, but I didn't want to find out. The figure shifted, stepping forward, and that's when the tension snapped. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted down the trail, our footsteps pounding against the gravel, the sound of shouts and footsteps chasing us through the darkness. My lungs burned, every breath ragged and shallow, but I didn't dare look back. As we ran down, something about the air around us changed. It wasn't just the sound of our frantic footsteps or the crunch of dirt and leaves beneath our shoes. It was the oppressive silence that crept in. The usual hum of crickets and rustling leaves was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed against my ears. "Do you feel that?" I managed to gasp, glancing at Sebastian. His eyes darted around the trees, his face tense with the same unease gnawing at me. Then it happened. A faint rustling sound came from somewhere behind us. Not loud, but distinct enough to make us both stop in our tracks. I turned, expecting to see our pursuers bursting through the trees, but there was no one. Just the faint silhouette of the trail we had just sprinted down. But something wasn't right. A patch of darkness in the trees seemed denser, heavier, as if the shadows themselves were alive. Then it shifted. My breath caught as I saw what looked like a figure, human-shaped but unnervingly still, standing just off the path. It didn't move, didn't react, but I swear it was watching us. Sebastian tugged my arm, snapping me back to reality. "We need to go," he muttered, his voice shaken. I didn't argue. As we sprinted the last stretch to the parking lot, that suffocating silence followed us, as if the forest itself had turned against us. The parking lot came into view like a beacon, and I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming in protest. We reached our cars, throwing ourselves inside and slamming the doors, just as the group burst out of the trail behind us. "Go!" I yelled at Sebastian, fumbling with my keys. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, the tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw them scrambling to pile into their car, their shouts fading into the night as the distance between us grew. But I didn't drive straight home. Neither did Sebastian. We met up a few blocks from his house, parking under a flickering streetlight. For a moment, we just sat there, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins, our breaths coming in shallow gasps. "What the hell just happened?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Sebastian didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone, showing me a photo. "I took this while they weren't looking," he said. The picture was blurry, grainy, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. The next day, I convinced Sebastian to come with me back to the McDonald's. We had to report what happened. When we arrived, we found a young manager, someone who looked like he'd actually listen. We showed him the picture and told him everything. As we spoke, his face went pale, his eyes widening with a mix of recognition and fear. "That guy used to work here," he said, his voice shaky. "He was fired a few months ago after his girlfriend, who also worked here, filed a restraining order against him. He was stalking her, harassing her. It got bad. The police got involved, but—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "But what?" I pressed. "He's been violating the restraining order," the manager continued, camping out in the parking lot. "We've reported him, but—" His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I felt a chill run down my spine. That man wasn't just dangerous. He was unhinged, and we had stumbled right into his orbit. It's been a week since that night, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I get in my car, I check the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights trailing me. I haven't been back to the Overlook or that McDonald's. I don't think I ever will. The fear clings to me, invading every quiet moment. When I close my eyes at night, I hear their voices, their laughter echoing in the dark. I see the shadowy figure in the trees, the metallic glint of his weapon. What haunts me the most is the question that keeps replaying in my mind. What if we hadn't run? What if we hadn't escaped? Some questions, I've learned, are better left unanswered. Now every time I pass by a dimly lit parking lot or a trailhead disappearing into the woods, I feel the weight of that night pressing down on me. It's a reminder, etched into my bones, that danger isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's waiting in the shadows, watching, ready to strike when you least expect it. Sebastian and I don't talk about that night anymore, but the silence between us speaks volumes. It's a shared understanding, a pact born out of fear. We survived, but something about us was left behind on that hill, a piece of our innocence, a sliver of trust in the world around us. And as much as I try to forget, I know one thing for certain. We got lucky, and luck, I've realized, isn't something to be relied on twice.